Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world today, welcome back to The Caring Economy with me, your host, Toby Usnik. Today, I'm really excited to have as our guest the remarkable Esther Dyson. She's a renowned journalist, author, investor, and philanthropist, and she's been in the forefront of technology and its impact on society for decades. I've followed her through her journalism and other things through the years. I'm really honored to have her. Today, we're going to explore her insights on the future of technology, society, and the economy. So with no further ado, Esther Dyson, welcome to The Caring Economy.
Good morning, day part, or hello, whatever day part it is.
So great to be with you, Esther. As I said, I followed you through the years, and we met this spring, early summer at an AI dinner with Norman Pearlstein and some others. And I was struck by your observations, not surprising to me at all. And I love what I know of you. You've got this really profound knowledge and experience and training around technology, around the humanities and journalism. And I wonder if you might just start, as we do with all of our guests, and give like a 3 or 4 minute digest of your life, kind of where you're born, how you were raised, maybe some pivots or mentors along the way. I know it's asking a lot because you've done so much so far.
Yeah, I'm almost as old enough to be president. So I was born in Switzerland. My parents were Swiss and English. They met in the late 40s at the Institute for Advanced Studies. So moved very quickly to the US, where my dad's boss was Oppenheimer. And yeah, that was an amazing bubble, which I finally got out of. I left home when I was 15 because I wanted to run away. And at the same time, I had no excuse because my parents let me do whatever I wanted as long as I took responsibility. But I just wanted to explore a different world. And I ended up at Harvard. I joined the Harvard Crimson. I was probably the last girl who got accepted onto the Crimson because she was cute.
Wow.
I had no idea that this was supposed to be a tough thing to do. Anyway, so I joined the Harvard Crimson, the Harvard Daily newspaper, and I got paid for proofreading, and then I wrote articles and things for free. And it just fundamentally, my guiding star in a sense is asking good questions. You know, the answers will change, but asking good questions is what you learn. And I didn't like studying either in school or at Harvard because formal education is kind of learning stuff that already exists. Mm-hmm. Versus with questions, you find out new stuff that people didn't already know. And as a reporter, again, you're finding out new things and sort of saying, well, you thought this was what was going on, but actually we discovered this other thing, or maybe this thing is changing. And so in a sense, that's what I've been doing ever since. And I did it as a fact checker at Forbes back when they had fact checkers.
Yep.
I worked on Wall Street for 5 years, where the first company I engaged with, they had raised $100 million. They still hadn't shipped their first shipments. They were doing a down round at 15 million. And everybody said, don't get involved with the VC that invested in these guys. But within a year after I joined the investment firm, they had indeed shipped their first packages. Their name was Federal Express.
Wow.
And I learned a ton about logistics. One interesting thing was at that point, simplicity and efficiency were the main thing. So everything went to Memphis. People didn't want to go to Memphis to go somewhere, but packages didn't really mind. And so the way to make it robust and reliable and so forth was to ship everything to Memphis. 15, 20 years later, everything was completely different. Now you had computers and everything was dynamically scheduled. So watching that world change was fascinating. Anyway, after that, 25 years writing a newsletter called Release 1.0 and running PC Forum, a conference that began as the Personal Computer Forum with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Jerry Brown, and it ended as PC Forum Platforms for Communication Forum with Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Reid Hoffman and people like that. Then I ended up midway through, I started going to Russia, which was kind of a combination of my father being in the space business which was the only place where we actually worked with the Russians effectively as a country long, long ago.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up training as a cosmonaut for 6 months.
As one does.
In Star City outside Moscow. And then got more interested in healthcare, joined the board of 23andMe, and then realized, why are we spending so much time fixing things that shouldn't have been broken?
Right.
So I started a 5-year initially and now 10-year project that's ending this year called Wellville, working in 5 small communities, helping to make them healthy and resilient versus improving the repair system, otherwise known as healthcare.
Yes.
So that's the trajectory.
Yeah, like the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yes.
Wow. I mean, there's so much to delve into here. I want to go back to the very beginning first and just say, as one of 5 boys, I wonder, did you have any siblings when your parents allowed you to go off at 15?
No, in fact, my father said the way he did, because he was British, half truth, half joking. Well, it's really useful. We need those bedrooms for the other kids. So I had a brother and 4 younger sisters and 1 older sister.
Wow.
And yeah, and they're also very interesting people.
I'm sure.
Speaking of which, my brother wrote a book called Analogia. The basic notion is we've moved from analog to digital, but when digital gets sufficiently complicated, it becomes analog again and unexplainable. And that's exactly what's happening right now.
And analogy also sounds a bit nostalgic. I think long for certain things that pass. But I want to stay focused on you. The other question I want to say is your parents are both basically scientists and taught you that critical thinking and examination, right? I mean, I have to believe that was really influential in your whole career trajectory.
Yeah, they didn't teach me, but they certainly helped me learn. I mean, it was just taken for granted. And the great thing was they didn't come home and talk about math and physics. They were curious about the world.
Mm-hmm. Were you one of those dinner tables where you all had to come with a point of view or something to share each night when you sat down?
No, we were the one thing is you were not allowed to bring a book to the table. So I used to read cereal boxes. And I remember asking my mother if she could make meringue pie because I had no idea that meringue on the cereal box was the same as meringue.
Cute. And then you talked about the Oppenheim bubble. I mean, give us a little bit of your reflections as a young girl being in that world with your parents. Now we've all seen the movie. We know more about the whole history, but we still don't fully understand all of it. You have a very informed view, I would think.
Well, it was informed. So I met Einstein, but I was much more interested in Mrs. Pennybacker, who was my first grade teacher, because she really ruled my life, at least at school. It felt totally normal. Everybody's life feels normal. They just think the other people are. And in fact, I remember, so when I was 12, I arranged to go spend a year in England when I was 13, because I was a snotty little Anglophile. And when I returned, I appreciated America more. But that was when I started working in the public library, which had sort of been my career goal for some years. And I learned a little more about the real world. I was shocked to find out, I knew you'd go to stores and restaurants and things, but I thought normal people got 3 months off every summer. So it was an amazing bubble. Most of the people at the Institute were actually foreigners, as we were originally. Yeah. And we had 2 Nobel Prize winners as neighbors.
Wow.
And
astonishing.
Yeah, and Oppenheimer and Gödel wandering around.
Did you feel the film did justice to the man and the project, or was it romanticized? Or
so how do I say, it made me cry, not out of sadness, but just some intensity of emotion. It just seemed so familiar. You know, the guys in their suits. I remember going to my parents' parties, and in retrospect, oh yes, they drank a lot and they smoked.
Yeah.
They were all extremely bright, and the women mostly had to deal with children, and the men went off and did physics and things. So I was too young to have any informed opinions on Oppenheimer, and I remember Kitty sitting around as well and so forth. But just the texture of it was perfect.
Yeah.
from what I know intellectually, the story was slightly romanticized, and the movie was not as linear as it might have been, but
Cool. One last question about the earlier days before we jump into tech. You get to Harvard Crimson, and I was fascinated when you noted the perhaps the last hire of a female based on her looks. Can you say more, not so much about that, but what you've seen in your career about women and how they make their way through the world, whether it's the Harvard Crimson or in the tech world? I suspect you've generally been in the minority as a woman in just about everything you've done. I'd like to believe things are better, but there's still work to be done, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
yeah, I mean, the first thing is I've been extremely lucky in so many ways. And one is the last boss I had was in 1982. It's much harder being a woman where you're competing with people for the same role versus, you know, as someone writing a newsletter, I was competing with other newsletter writers and with other conferences, but there wasn't this scarcity of position that, you know, whether you're female or black or foreign or have a speech impediment or something, being in a corporate structure just creates this scarcity and this rivalry in a way that you don't get if you're an independent operator. The two times I actually started something, both times I hired a CEO, because the reality is being CEO is a huge responsibility and you have to do all the stuff that's not fun versus just being the owner, and is much easier. So again, I had it kind of lucky.
Yeah.
But right now, in some sense, honestly, it's hard to be a girl or a woman, and it's hard to be a boy or a man. So many businesses who one way or another are trying to addict you. And now those predatory business models are being enabled by AI. And Jonathan Haidt,
NYU.
There's diabetes and bad food and plastics. And then there's information diabetes, which is bad information, bad interactions. And in the end, it's not about the thing as much as it is about the relationship. So I have these two companies that do couples counseling. One is you and your money, and the other is you and your food. Yeah, they're not about nutrition. They're not about making spreadsheets about how much you have in the bank. They're about your relationship with this thing that often becomes toxic because it makes you feel guilty or inadequate, or you're always dealing with scarcity if it's your money, or maybe too much if it's your food.
Jonathan Haidt, I know, I'd interviewed with him years ago. He is getting a lot of press now for the new book, but the previous book, Modeling of the American Mind, sets it up, right? Like, it's the prelude to what you're describing, I think. Ladies and gentlemen, again, today we have Esther Dyson with us. She's the renowned journalist, investor, philanthropist, and what I would call a technophile, but more than that, I would say even a futurist. Can you say a little bit about its appeal to you and why tech?
I mean, to be honest, another privilege I've had is rarely having to make decisions, because the obvious just emerges and becomes obvious. So when I was on Wall Street, tech just became the most interesting thing that was going on. It was the thing that was changing the economics of so many businesses, including, for example, FedEx, which, though this was later on moved from that centralized form to dynamically scheduled, totally distributed. My parents were scientists. I felt comfortable with science and math and so forth. And even when I started, AI was also in the air in a very different form. And that's what people now don't realize. They think AI is LLMs and nothing else. But AI began as expert systems. If A equals B, then C equals D. In a sense, AI is what we don't understand. So we think, oh, if we don't understand it, it must be really intelligent or something like that. And these things were initially called expert systems, and then it turned out doctors didn't like to be replaced by expert systems, so they began calling them assistants. And there were, natural language understanding and all kinds of things. The most interesting one, which is relevant today, was this guy called Doug Lennett, and he wanted to create not a language translator kind of thing, but a model of the world. And at that point, there wasn't a lot of information online. So he hired a lot of grad students, mostly women, to type in not so much data, but relationships. This hierarchies, subsets, this is an instance of that. This is related to this. And I wrote an article about this in my newsletter, and he liked it so much he offered me a job entering knowledge, which I politely declined. But now, 30 years on, the LLMs predict based on what is being written and what's on the internet, some of which is good and some of which is garbage.
Yep.
But they don't really have the fundamental understanding. And what they really need is exactly what Leonard was building, which is these models that show causation, correlation, contradiction. This is an instance of that. And one of my favorite investments is a company called System.com, which is doing that in the healthcare and sort of pharma field, where you can use an LLM as a very nice front end and so forth and so on. But ultimately, it's a model that actually does understand how things work. And of course, a lot of that is now happening. People are combining various kinds of models, including just basic understanding of arithmetic.
And I wonder if you might say a little bit about where you see your past in tech and prognostication and healthcare. Where do you think we are, and where do you think we're going to go in the next 5 or 10 years with this combo of tech and healthcare and all?
Healthcare is sort of the epitome of all the promise and all the challenges. A system that is being overrun with predatory business models, a system designed more focused on billing and reimbursement than it is on care, employing people who do care but are getting burned out by the level of paperwork and the number of regulations and the challenges. AI is very good at being repeatable and remembering all the 29 steps you need to do. It's not very good at saying, I don't need to do steps 1 through 6 because I know this patient. There's too much bureaucracy and procedure, and the AI can reduce it to some extent, but the real value is in human beings caring for one another, and that's kind of being
pushed aside.
Yeah, it's just being absorbed and then soaked with the need for following protocols and making sure that nothing fraudulent occurs. But back to what's happening, there's the business of human caring. And I have this dear friend who talks to patients as human beings and discovers things like, oh, this guy can't read. That's why he's taking advantage of his pension from the city where he worked as a trucker for 40 years. And that's why he's basically suffering from substance abuse and also from scurvy because his diet consists of wine and potato chips. But nobody tests him for vitamin C deficiency because vitamin tests are not reimbursed. And how we can use AI to improve care and diagnostics and treatment, and at the same time, enable the human beings in the system to be human beings.
Love your wellness work because you are offering a solution, I think, that's holistic, right? It's as much about preventative care and education, collaborative effort.
It's not about care. The best way to reduce the costs of healthcare is to make healthcare less necessary. And when you do need it, you want it to be good, and you want them to give you the right strips on your wrist and all that kind of stuff. Affordable. And there are way too many tests being done for things that aren't necessary, and then too few for things that are obvious but cheap. So keeping people healthy, the statistics of if you don't smoke and you love your parents and so forth, you're going to grow up into a resilient kid. Those statistics are so clear, and we need to pay much more attention to them. And then at the other end, we can do protein folding and discover how to make a vaccine in 6 months because we understand the molecular structure. And those are both very separate directions that both need to happen.
Well, also, I think when you talk about healthcare, and I know you've been active in this area, it's the mental health as well, right? It's not just the physical health, it's the mental. What's next for that initiative? Does it expand? Does it close? What does it look like now?
I like to say it turns from a caterpillar to a butterfly. We're doing what we call our commencement ceremony. It's our annual gathering, but it's very much looking forward to the future where how do you make relationships not toxic? How do you create collaboration versus too much competition? Your job is not to win the race. Your job is to do your part in the relay race. And that's what we're trying to do. The communities, again, they've commenced. It's theirs. And we're in the background hoping they stay connected and talking to them about how to carry it forward. But it's what should be sustainable and is not is government funding for childcare, for better maternal care without the racial disparities that are horrifying right now. And so the next thing I'm personally going to be doing is writing a book, working title, Don't Rent Your Community's Health from an Absentee Landlord.
I love it.
And the absentee landlord is this government. They're not in Muskegon. Most of the money gets funneled to Detroit.
Yeah, and also a consolidation of healthcare. So it's companies that aren't really invested in your community or of your community.
No, and again, it's the schools. Probably the most important thing in building a community is, in fact, the schools, because the parents get together, they think about their children. The fabric of the community is very much the schools. It should also be voting. And one of the campaigns I love is an outfit called voter.org that helps people register to vote in medical facilities. And they say it's a social determinant of health. Yeah. And the point is, it's not just, does your person get in? But even if your person doesn't get in, the person that is in notices, oh, there's like 30% of the people really don't like me. Maybe I should do something. Maybe I should listen to them.
Yep.
And your voice is heard, even though it's not decisive.
Correct. I mean, that's great prelude for the fall, right? Like 30% or more of the nation is going to be unhappy no matter what happens. And that's before we talk about adding in guns in this country. I'm mindful of the time, but I've got so many more questions. I want to ask two, Esther. One is we talked earlier before about leadership. I think that part of the biggest challenge in any organization or any issue is leadership or lack thereof. And I wonder if in your years of journalism and investing, if you have any reflections or vignettes or stories about leaders in the organizations that you've followed or invested in, maybe good practices, bad practices, or warning signs. There must be certain things that you're always like, warning, or wow.
Yeah.
Go into that.
Well, in terms of investing, if I ask, what is your motivation? And they say, oh, I've always wanted to be CEO. That to me is a really bad sign.
Yeah.
No, I've always wanted to solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still figuring out how. I need a team to help me do that. If I need a CEO and I'm just the chief science officer, great. I want to solve the problem. It's not about me. And there's some really bad deals I've avoided because of that particular thing. Mm. Then there's a story about myself. This was back in like 1995 or something. I'd been traveling in Russia and I dropped my computer and they replaced its hard disk, which was really interesting in the sense that the hard disk was working, but it wasn't embodied in the computer, so it didn't know how much battery life it had. And there was just these weird things that kind of made the existence of the computer more visible. Anyway, I brought it back and gave it to my team. Could you please go get this fixed? After 2 or 3 days, my CEO came up to me and said, Esther, this is really awkward, but we're trying to get your computer fixed. And it's like you seem to think that we're not trying. And I was horrified because I knew I was kind of frustrated and grumpy, but I know for a fact I did not say you're an idiot to anybody, but clearly I was behaving really badly. And this is in a team of 5 people. Mm-hmm. And she was terrified to tell me that truth. Mm-hmm. So now, think of a team of 500,000 people and the temptation on the one hand of people to be overly polite and deferential to someone who's paying their huge salary and gives them stock options. And mm-hmm. I've always remembered that, how easy it is just to become a jerk. And unfortunately, I've seen it. I mean, there's so many instances of it in this field.
Yeah.
Then, every once in a while, there's like people who become better, like Mark Cuban and Mark Benioff. But mostly the nice initial DNA just gets eaten up by the hungry metabolism of money and power and position. And again, competing for those scarce jobs.
Yeah, fascinating.
So, well, fascinating and scary, and the amount of power Even as governments seem to become less effective, businesses become more effective in sucking out value and getting valuations that have nothing to do with their intrinsic value.
So that's the perfect segue to my other question around AI, which is I've been teaching courses informally for AI for social impact, and I believe in it. I really do believe in it. I think it's seismic. And I've read certain folks like Dr. Fei Li out at Stanford. Her memoir is gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's about human-centered AI, right? Like we have that power. The technology, in my view, is neutral, but humankind will take it one way or the other. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about AI and how do we keep it or make it human-centered? I'm doing my best to try and get people engaged with it by literally sitting down with them through tutorials and letting them understand it, engage with it, because if they don't engage with it, they risk being left behind. And I wonder what your views are on that. Is it adamant that we be human-centered with the use of this technology, or is it out of our hands?
It's sort of more fundamental. You could talk about telephones. I mean, oh my gosh, telephones are really going to change things. How are people going to use telephones? Are they going to use them to call you up and tell you lies? Are they going to use them to stay in touch with their grandmother? So it's not the AI per se, it's how it's used and who controls it. It's not so much a question of, oh, I need to audit the algorithms. It's a little more, I need to audit the data. But what you really need to do is audit the results. People say, well, the medical system actually is doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is reimburse insurers, make investors rich. Whether it's doing that with AI or with medical tests or instruments or employees' time, how does the system use the employees' time? How much do they devote to care? How much do they devote to paperwork? It's auditing the results in some sense. And in the other, it's very much human beings need to understand their own motivations and the motivations of the systems that they interact with, whether it's through people, through bots, through forms, through payments of money. I mean, it's what is the system trying to achieve versus what are you actually trying to achieve? And how are you allowing the system to manipulate you versus how can you manipulate yourself? It sort of comes down to transparency. You can manipulate yourself untransparently by saying, yeah, I'm really hot and I work hard and I deserve what I got and I deserve this job and people should just bow to me whenever I say something. You're manipulating yourself untransparently versus being humble and saying, I'm doing this job because I'm trying to achieve that result and I want to work with these other people. So it's the purpose behind it.
The auditing piece, though, how best to audit? We know that government lags in its ability to understand, engage, source, fund this kind of watchdog. There are nonprofits out there doing it. Some brands, businesses are trying to do it themselves. Is it got to be a collective effort? How do we make sure that this advent of AI is largely for the better of society?
Yeah. So I have an actual answer. The answer does not include is how do we make this happen? Look back at something like fire insurance. Fires, I mean, now we have wildfires and so forth, but just industrial fires in factories and homes and everything else, huge problem. The insurance industry came in and they didn't say, oh, we're just going to collect a lot of money and then pay for the damage fires cause. They said, we're going to come in and we're going to audit you. We're going to look at your fire escapes. We're going to see whether you have emergency instructions posted. We're going to examine your electrical wiring. And if things are in good shape, we will give you cheap premiums. If things are not in good shape, we'll raise your premiums, or we might just say, sorry, dude, you're uninsurable. And so they dramatically reduced the incidence of fires. And there are fire codes and laws and things, but ultimately the insurance business could be far more flexible and forward-looking because they didn't need to wait for Congress or for some agency. They needed to accurately assess the risk And then you have problems like in California where they accurately assess the risk and the government won't. You have to deal with the reality that the risk may be very high and maybe you shouldn't live in this place, whether it's flood insurance or fire. But the basic idea would be that you have this intermediary party that will look at liability as opposed to fires. Are you going to be sued? Imagine if the Sacklers had to buy liability insurance. Anybody who was actually looking at what was going on, as we see subsequently in the movies, would have seen incredibly suspicious numbers about how much was being prescribed. And so what I would like to see is liability insurance for many, many more businesses with an understanding that you needed this kind of insurance to do business, to be
Fascinating.
just, but I'd rather have this intermediary that is forward thinking and much more flexible and has a vested interest in making money by making you not do things that society will basically sue you for 10 years from now.
And is the intermediary, who staffs the intermediary? Is it a combination from private sector, government, civil society?
No, it's a reinsurance company.
Okay.
Auditors and people who have a good nose for danger. For these numbers look kind of suspicious.
Corruption, danger, the macro and micro, all that.
All these kids that now are online way past their bedtimes. I mean, any forensic, take the Frances Haugen, all that. This is where the whistleblowers go to alert people to.
Morning.
But the problem is Facebook is not paying liability insurance for the damage that Mark Zuckerberg stood up and apologized for in Congress.
Fascinating. I love that approach. It's a fascinating idea, and I hope that our listeners will come back to us with suggestions. On that point, if people want to know more about you or your organizations and causes and investments, what's the best way to be in touch?
Probably on LinkedIn. Okay. And just for the record, I'm not actively investing now. I have one or two but I'm mostly working with the startups I've already invested in because it's kind of a crappy time right now. But for other stuff, Dyson, EDYSON at ED, my initials, venture.com. Like, in the end, you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn.
So my last question for you, I mean, we've gone way over time and I apologize, but pearls of wisdom that you've gleaned in this great, lovely, fun, adventurous life you've got. Are there any sort of like mantra things? You talked about asking good questions. Is that one of them? Or what would you give to our young and old listeners alike for a way forward? Okay, so I have a bunch of them. They're all with the understanding I'm a nice white lady. My parents were scientists. I was privileged. And there's so many people right now who cannot take good risks because a good risk still means there's like a 20% chance of failure. And if you can't afford that, you cannot take good risks. And that's part of the social challenge of the future. Mm-hmm. Just some kind of safety net. But beyond that, my first is always make new mistakes, learn from them and make new mistakes, keep doing that. Second, never take a job for which you are already qualified, because then you won't learn anything. And second, you want the kind of employer who wants to invest in your education, not merely exploit what you already know. Mm-hmm. And then the third, which is the biggest stretch, never do anything you wouldn't do for free, but still try and get paid. And that's kind of my life now. I love that. Be passionate about it. Well, you've been that from the start. Esther Dyson, I want to thank you so much for joining us on The Caring Economy. Esther is the world-renowned journalist, investor, philanthropist, tech guru, and I can't wait to have you back and keep following your great trajectory. You're a gift. Thank you so much. Thank you.